think the main inspiration was to do something different, because obviously we've done a lot of courses which have featured cityscapes and landscapes, and I think we just wanted to shake it all up a little bit. So as an educational platform, what we want to try and do is make sure we push people all the time, and the way for us to push students is for me to push myself, to try different things. So I'm always just one step ahead of the students. And we've done a zoo course many years ago, and we just felt with safari we'd be kind of doing the animals, but obviously putting them in a setting within a context as well. So you see a lot of these animals in their natural surroundings, so we're combining, if you like, several things: the landscape stuff that we've done previously and the zoo course. So both of those things are going to be a challenge for the students, and I suppose the main inspiration behind it was just to push people, push me and push the students even further. There's lots of layering skills because we're using all the same tools with the brush pen and the colour and the line work. But I think in terms of visualisation, one key skill, which is perhaps a little bit different from stuff that we normally do, is this thing of proportion. Because when we're doing cityscapes, it doesn't matter where it is, we're not worried too much about proportion. We're missing windows out, we're missing buildings out, we're making things bigger, smaller, editing. But when we're doing the animals, and let me give you an example here of the lion, you've got to get the proportions right. So the initial drawing is done a lot more carefully, a lot more slowly, to make sure it looks natural, it looks kind of realistic. I mean, there's other things that we've played around with a little bit, like the colour and the technique of the grass, but the actual proportions and the features of the face, we've drawn that a lot more accurately and a lot more slowly than we would do normally if it was kind of like a building with windows and stuff, where you can be a lot more playful. So one of the kind of key skills in this is really to make sure that the visualization is much more objective perhaps than the more kind of subjective route that we go down with our other courses that we produce. So we just look at this one again, you can see there's a lot of weight down at the bottom here, where you're noticing the shadows to give it that sense of solidity, because what you want to try and do is make sure it sits in that space, it sits within the grass as well. So she's actually sitting there, she's got all of this weight, so you're looking closely more at shadows. It's not that we ignore them in other courses, but they're just not as big a feature. And it's the same with the modelling around her face as well, the shadows underneath the chin here and underneath the eyes and around the eyes and the ears, all of that modelling, which is done with a combination of brush pen and watercolour paints, and also line work as well, is built up throughout the different steps within the process. But it's all about making it look real, making it look realistic, without going down that super realistic photographic approach that some artists do, because it's just not our way of working. We don't do it that particular way. It's a little bit more dramatic. It's got a bit more kind of, drama to the whole thing, but it still has to sit within that space and become readable as a realistic looking animal. And in some ways that's a bit of a challenge between the two, because you want it to look kind of quite creative and quite artistic, and a bit kind of splashy and messy, but you want it to have that realism as well. And that combination of the two is not always easy. And probably the elephants is a good example of that as well, because it's got, as Rebecca's just pointed out, it's got that sense of weight and shadow and kind of weightiness around the solid object sitting in that space. But there's also some kind of drama going on as well. It's got that wonderful kind of romantic feel in the way the whole thing is compressed and composed on the page, on all these kind of like very loose marks that are going on as well. And I suppose that's tapping upon style. I have a certain way of working which I want to kind of simulate and kind of put across to the students when they're working on these courses. I think one of the things I really enjoyed about this is giving it their setting as well, and almost doing the setting quite understated. So for example, you can tell this is it savannah, prairie, savannah, big open space, whatever you want to call it, huge big open space. So the way to capture a huge big open space is to do a big open space. I mean, it kind of makes sense. You wouldn't do anything in here, you just leave it as white space with a little sense of the horizon cutting across here, and then you've got the hills and the mountains in the background, and you've got these gorgeous like little chunky trees which are just like bookending the composition of the elephants. And that's what I enjoyed about it the most. If we just flick onto the lioness once more, you can see that the tall grasses, putting those in was so cool. That was the fun part, just giving it that kind of setting, because we didn't do that in the zoo course a few years ago. They were just very much floating in isolation. So this is what I think makes this course really interesting for me as an artist and as a teacher, is giving it this context. And to push the context even further, we've got another one here that I want to show you of the baboon. And with this one, the tree is framing the whole thing. It's almost like a frame that we've given this little guy here, you know. And then you've got all these different techniques around the outside, the hatching, the black negative space in between the leaves, continuous line work as well, little pops of colour, just to kind of bring everything else together. Because if it didn't have the tree, I just don't think it would work. It'd be too easy. There wouldn't be much to it. So this makes it challenging as well as making it much more interesting to do. Well, this links in with progression, doesn't it? You know, we put out a course which on one level looks completely different, but it's actually not. It's using and utilising a lot of the skills that we've taught elsewhere, like the hatching technique and the different directions of the hatching technique as well, varying the line work as well, taking a line for a walk, applying lots of pressure to the line, sometimes going in really, really dark and really, really heavy. All those things that are just embedded in lots of other courses. We're just applying it to a completely different subject. The only big difference, as I mentioned at the beginning, is this thing about proportion and realism, making it look accurate, as opposed to some of the courses we've done where we've missed buildings out, missed streets out, missed windows out. It doesn't matter. With this, it does matter. Imagine this baboon and you've missed an eye out, or you're giving him 3 eyes, or you'd missed his teeth out or his mouth or whatever. It just wouldn't work. So, you know, we've got to make sure that certain things are realistic and look accurate. Otherwise, it's just not gonna work. But let's go back to the lioness again. You can see with the grasses in the foreground, especially when it cuts in front of these dark shadows that we talked about a few minutes ago. I've used titanium white to extend it across. And that just gives it that wonderful texture. You know, you've got those dark areas, which is giving weight to the lioness. And then you've got this layering in front of the grasses. So it's just giving it that setting. It's giving it that situation where it's actually sitting down on the grass and making it look realistic. The other way to do that would have been to blank it out first, but I'm not really clever enough to do that. Not with something as subtle as this. It would have affected everything else around it. So the way to do it is just to draw it naturally and not worry about the grasses, and then do it as a layering effect on top. It's got to be titanium white. Don't use Chinese white because it's too wimpy. Titanium white is much more opaque. And I've used a rigger as well. And you've got to kind of get a really good balance between the water and the pigment to make sure it's thick enough so it goes over the dark areas behind, but it's watery enough so it actually streaks across and it doesn't look too kind of stiff. So it's getting that mix just right. But it's really effective. And I've used it in several of them. Didn't use it really in the baboon, but I used it down here at the bottom as well. You can see little streaks of these tall grasses. But on this one, I've also managed to blank it off as well. So that little strand, or those 3 or 4 strands there, is the actual white of the paper. And I've just kind of managed to do the negative space around. But I couldn't do that with all of them because it would have been too complicated and it would have given me a headache. I loved doing these so much. It was great. And one of the best things was I got to use your photographs, Rebecca, because you provided me with all the photos, and we had a great time going through them because you had about 60 million photos that you'd taken on safari, and we just went through them all and we just sort of chose the ones that you liked and the ones that I liked, and we were kind of coming at it from different directions because you know, what made them special for you was different from me, because I was seeing more about the composition and the way in which I could manufacture them as pictures, whereas perhaps you were looking at different things, maybe the lighting of it or the setting or the memory of actually photographing it. So that combination of 2 artists working together to come up with a subject without falling out over it and killing each other, it was great. And that was a real privilege to work with, a fellow artist and friend.
Super. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.